Hi, folks. AJ Bernard here. I'm the pastor at Center in Spring Grove United Methodist Churches near Washington Courthouse, Ohio, and we're continuing our study in Genesis chapter 6 by looking at the beginning, or we're continuing our study in Genesis by looking at the beginning of Genesis chapter 6. Now, this is what some of my favorite teachers refer to as the dark, spooky corners of the Old Testament. There's some stuff here that is just really interesting. So let's look at verse 1 of Genesis chapter 6. When men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh; his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. This is an incredibly important passage, I think, for understanding the rest of what happens in Genesis 6. Obviously, because Moses opens with it, because we don't understand it, and because we don't understand it, we skip it. We read it, and we just sort of turn our brains off, and we wait until we find something that we do understand. Now, that's not hard to do, because verse 5, um, it starts to make a lot more sense. But verses 1 through 4, we just sort of look at, and we read through, but we don't often ponder over. So let's ponder over them. Verse 1, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God. Now, this phrase, if we look in our Lexham Hebrew English Interlinear Bible, we see this phrase right here, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, or the sons of the gods, which is an interesting interpretation. Elohim is a word in English, like it's a word like the English word deer, right? So if you saw one deer running across the road in front of you, and if you're from the Midwest, you know what I'm talking about. Um, then you would say I saw one deer. But if you saw a dozen deer standing in a field, you'd use the same word, deer and deer. It's both a singular and a plural word. So Elohim is like that as well. It is both a singular and a plural word. There are times when Moses uses it. There's a spot in Deuteronomy, and I should have brought it up, where Moses uses it 5 times in 2 verses. 2 of those times he refers to the God of Israel, and 3 of those times he refers to the pagan gods of the nations. So Elohim is not a name. It's not his name. And this is really important when you're dealing with folks like Mormons or Muslims. Muslims will say that their God's name, Allah, comes from the Hebrew Eloah, or is related to the Hebrew Eloah, which means God, and Elohim is simply a conjugation, if you will, of Eloah. Um, so they'll say that because of this, Allah and Eloah, or Elohim, are the same being. Now, the the Mormons use Elohim as a name for God. It's not his name. It's just the generic word God, because it refers variously in the Hebrew text to, like I said before, the pagan gods of the nations, um, or other sort of divine-ish, heavenly, celestial type beings. Sometimes the angels are called Elohim. Sometimes the heavenly council is called Elohim. Um, that's a pretty interesting study, but we're way off topic at this point. So let me get back on topic. Elohim is not a name. The name you can see right here on your screen, right there in the Hebrew text. And most academics use Yahweh because they're not interested in studying it out, which is sad to me because it's an incredibly important word. We'll talk about the name sometime soon. We should talk about the name really soon, actually. Maybe I'll do the name tomorrow. Anyway, um, so we're looking at the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, who saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took of them wives, all that they chose. As we read, we'll get back here into the English. There we go. They took as their wives any that they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit will not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim. Now, this comes from the Hebrew word nephal, which simply means, interestingly enough, in English, to fall, to, travel violently towards the ground, to trip, to stumble, to fall, right? Um, the fallen ones is then the proper translation of Nephilim, the fallen ones. What does that mean? Probably it's talking about angels who followed Satan and lost their positions in heaven. So, what are they doing here in Genesis 6? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the sons of God. The sons of God. So, who are the sons of God? We talked about the phrase B'nai Elohim. Um, this is the direct creations of God. So, Adam would have been a B'nai Elohim, but Seth, his son, would not have, right? The phrase sons of God or son of God is used varyingly for a few different people. David, Solomon, they're called sons of God. Adam is called a son of God. Um, but these are affectionate terms, like you might call someone your uncle, right? Um, God is saying that these men do well, and He's sort of rewarding them. Alternatively, in the New Testament, we find John saying that Christ, Yeshua, Jesus, gave all those who believed in Him power to become the sons of God. But that's a different kind of sonship. What we're talking about here in Genesis 6 is a direct creation of God. We're talking about angels. We're talking specifically about Nephilim, the fallen angels. And how do I know that? Verse 4 says, They came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. That is, they produce unnatural offspring. They produce more powerful offspring than your normal person. These were mighty men of old, the men of renown. Now, could this be an origin story for the other um, religious myths? Stories like Thor, the god of thunder. Maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe this is where that idea comes from, that there were special men who lived on the earth among the other men, but these men were different, and they became, the legendary embellishment. They grew as heroes or whatever. I don't know. Um, but what I do know is that the offspring of the fallen ones, these B'nai Elohim, and the daughters of men, were not natural offspring. This is interesting later on. Let me see if I can find it right quick. Whoa, hey, ha, 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 ha. Right? Yeah, scrolling through the entire Bible. Not exactly conducive to what I'm looking for. So let's go to Genesis 6. And we'll just see if we can arrow key. There we go. We'll arrow key down a bit. Not, we're in Isaiah 6. That's not Genesis 6. This is high quality production videos right here, folks. I'm telling you, this is just collapse that, and we'll come up here, and there is Genesis. There's chapter 6. Whoops. Collapse this. All right. So the Lord saw, verse 5, the wickedness of man was great. So the Lord decides to um, destroy all the people. Uh, verse 8, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, and this is the important one. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. What does that mean? Was Noah sinless? No. Noah was, of course, not sinless. How do I know? Because Paul says, there is none righteous, no, not one, right? So Noah sinned. What does it mean then to say that Noah was blameless in his generation? It doesn't mean he was sinless. It might mean that his bloodline was pure. He was perfect in his generation. He was a full-blooded human being, whereas the rest of the human bloodlines had been corrupted. Um, or maybe not all of them, but some of them. But God chose Noah because of his obedience, his faithfulness. Or maybe God chose Noah because because he was the last full-blooded human left. I don't know. Um, and why is that important? Because the bloodline of the Messiah must be pure. When Messiah comes, he must be fully human in order to uh, redeem mankind. He must be one of us. He must also be fully God um, in order to be worthy of doing the act of redemption. Um, Otherwise, we would have a man as our savior, and the Bible very clearly says that God alone is our savior. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting, or it weirded you out, or something like that. Let me know in the comments below if you like that sort of thing. If you disagree with me, if you think I'm an idiot, please tell me. This is YouTube, um, and I will be back tomorrow, hopefully. And I think tomorrow we're going to stop our Genesis study and just look at the name of God, which is literally my favorite topic in the whole world anyway. So why not? God bless.